Hello and welcome to COMM 2010, Communication and Organisational Culture. Let's start Module 2 by extending our exploration of the basics and focus on organisational culture. Our agenda for this presentation is firstly, a brief recap. 2, what is an organisation? 3, what is organisational communication? 4, what is culture? And finally, what is organisational culture? In discussion 1, I asked you to think about communication in an organisation you are a part of. I want you to keep this organisation in mind. I'm going to refer to it from now on as your organisation. This is the organisation whose culture you'll study for your ethnography, and the one you'll think about as you complete the self-awareness organisational identification inventory. Whew, that was a mouthful. I'll be asking questions about your organisation for you to note and think about as we engage with the material. The question may not seem pertinent at this point, but it might later. My goal is for you to leave the presentation with a list of questions to ask yourself about your organisation, and if you don't know how to find the answers, to strategise how you can. From time to time, I'll throw in examples from my own organisation, the University of Iowa. Before we turn our attention to Keaton, the author of our text, I want to introduce a couple of different definitions. Not to confuse you, but this class draws students from many majors, and I want to make sure we're all aware of the different perspectives in the field of organisational culture. Bremer offers the legal definition of an organisation as entities with the same sorts of rights and privileges and obligations as people. It recognises organisations as entities that buy and sell property, sign contracts, produce profits and losses, pay taxes, unless of course they have non-profit status, and also comply with the nation's legal system. Smith and Turner criticised this definition and as it characterised organisations as impersonal containers that exist apart from people, and suggests that people enter and leave organisations that have clearly defined physical boundaries. The communicative definition of organisations views them as being created and maintained through communication. This is the definition that Keaton offers, and we'll explore this later in the presentation. In 2001, Cheney and Christens offered a social definition of organisations, focusing on the social responsibility of them and expectations that they are to be responsive to the public. They said that as a result of these growing expectations, organisations need to create a unique sense of identity or self for the organisation in relationship to the community, its citizens and other institutions. You'll notice how many organisations sponsor community events and do outreach to stakeholders in the local community. I've pictured Hills Bank and Trust Company above. They do a great summer outreach program for kids in the Iowa City Coralville area. Most of the time there's a blurring of definitions, and some scholars may use these interchangeably. Similarly, members of an organisation may consciously or unconsciously accept all three definitions. I just wanted to put them out there so you're aware of these terms in case you came across them during your research. So let's look exactly at what Keaton says. She begins by focusing on elements of an organisation. She states that an organisation is a group of people interacting, but people stand at a bus stop and interact, or in line at a bank, and they aren't in an organisation. She then adds, these organisational members interact with each other and the organisational clients and customers in purposeful, goal-directed activity. And also that people in organisations do not act randomly. Rather, organisations are sites of controlled and coordinated activity. Do you agree with this? To what extent is your organisation a site of controlled and coordinated activity? I don't want you to be a couch potato when you read our text. I want you to feel able to challenge it if you think Keaton is overgeneralising or is simply just plain wrong. Keaton says an organisation must have a superordinate goal, one that is so difficult, time-consuming and complex that it's beyond the capacity of one person to accomplish. The text offers some examples of the elements that go into a superordinate goal. What do you think is the superordinate goal of your organisation, and what are its elements? Do you think all members are aware of this? Why? Or why not? Perhaps this is a bit of an idealised view of an organisation. I can buy the idea of a group of people working together to achieve a shared goal or shared goals, but we can never lose sight of the fact that people in an organisation are diverse. Do all members of your organisation metaphorically row in the same direction? Are there rogue rowers, people who don't follow explicit or implicit organisational mandates, people who coast instead of rowing, people who don't interact with each other and organisational clients and customers in a purposeful, goal-directive, activity sort of way? Are you one of them? Make a note of these people and watch them to see how they communicate and who they communicate with. You may even want to interview them and delve deeper into their psyche for your ethnography about your organisation. How much money have you spent on college tuition in the last few years? You're a paying organisational member of the UI. Do you know what our superordinate goal is? If not, I encourage you to Google the Iowa Promise. That outlines our mission, identity, core values, and steps we're taking to achieve our goals. Does your organisation have a similar strategic plan that you're aware of? Okay, moving on in the same vein. An important point that Keaton brings up is that all members of a network are linked through some type of network structure, even if there's no direct connection or face-to-face encounters. What type of network structure is in your organisation? How are people ordered into functional or operational units, and how are they structured? What hierarchies exist? Are you aware of what rights, responsibilities and power exist at the different levels? For your ethnography, you'll need to be aware of these, so think of a way to find out. Org charts might offer a skeleton, but the people at each level, as well as your own observations, may be able to flesh this out. Do you know that you can access all the UI org charts? They're in the operation manual in the appendix section. I've put the URL here, but you can Google it to find out. What communication practices exist between the different levels and people of the same level and organisational members on and off site? I made the diagram above and used it as our class logo, as the bottom circle indicates the organisation. The people on the right are part of the organisation to constitute or create it through various communication channels. The members of an organisation shape the organisation through communication and in turn are affected by organisational communication. I want you to explore this process in your ethnography. I just added this slide because news outlets reported that Trump is considering moving the press corps from the White House to a location in a nearby but separate building. How are different groups housed in your organisation? And do some locations have more prestige than others? Does location matter if we have email and phones? How important do you think water cooler or treat day conversation is? Organisations are dynamic. People come and go, and newcomers, to varying degrees, shape the culture of the organisation. Have you seen this happening with your organisation? If so, what or who was the catalyst for change? And what did it change from and to? So Keaton concludes the first part of the chapter by saying, An organization is a dynamic system of organizational members influenced by stakeholders who communicate within and across organizational structures to achieve a superordinate goal. After offering this definition, would you agree with this that organizations preserve knowledge, behaviors, mental maps, norms and values over time and maintain a thread of coherence, or a kind of organizational memory? Think what parts of your organization are parts of your organization's memory. This may take a lot of consideration. What are parts of the UI's organizational or institutional memory? Let's look at one effort to preserve institutional memory and make new members aware of this.
Do you know why the T. Ann Cleary Walkway is named the T. Ann Cleary Walkway?
I do not, but I assume it's after someone who has donated to the university.
Someone actually died that was pretty famous. I think it was someone, maybe a nurse, or I think it's someone that maybe made an impact on the community or University of Iowa. But yeah, I think there was a shooting. I think that's what it was. But,
Do you know anything else about the shooting?
It might have been a chemistry building, maybe. That's why it's close to here. That's why it's named that. But yeah, that's pretty much not a whole lot, you know. But
how did you find out about the shooting?
I think it was from I asked one of the upperclassmen, I think my freshman year, why, like, what's, like, they told me to go to Cleary Walkway for something. I think it was like some organization, but yeah, and then I was like, what is it, like, who's Ann Cleary? And then I figured it out. She just from basic word of mouth, you know, on the topic and stuff. So
okay, do you know who T. Ann Cleary was?
No. I mean, I would just kind of guess that she was like, I don't know, a professor here or something, like a long time ago.
Have you ever heard anyone talk about a shooting here?
No.
This is called the T. Ann Cleary Walkway.
No.
Do you know anything about T. Ann Cleary?
Didn't she donate a bunch of money or something?
No. Do you know anything about the school shooting in 1991?
No.
Have you ever heard?
Cleary Walkway is named after one of the professors who used to teach here, and she was, I believe, killed by a student. I think that's what I've heard. I'm not 100% sure, but I believe it was dedicated to her for all her hard work and effort as a professor here until she died.
Do you know anything else about the shooting that happened on November 1st?
I think it occurred over by Van Allen Hall. I'm not 100% sure.
My freshman year, I learned that the T. Ann Cleary Walkway was named after an upper faculty member that worked at the university in the sciences program. And after a student, I guess in the past they had a thesis competition that they had students apply for, and one of the students who was not awarded the best thesis actually was disappointed and went into, I guess, appeal their decision, and she and a couple other faculty members had to explain that they couldn't do so. And that same student, who I think was an international student, you know, I think he was a Chinese international student, came back and actually shot her and I think another person in the building. I don't know if it was her secretary or a student. And she died, and I'm pretty sure, yeah, that she passed away from that, and they named this walkway.
Interpretation of Lit students made this movie and wrote a piece about it in 2014. Did you know that we were a site of a mass shooting in 1991? The second assumption is that organisational level interpretations reflect the views of upper level managers or owners. Is this the case at the UI, or even right now with Trump and the GOP? Is it the case in your organisation? How much do you think the designated leader of your organisation shapes interpretations? Also, how can you find out? Okay, changing gears. Let's look at what is organizational communication. Organizational communication includes communication between people and the channels of communication. It differs from business communication because it encompasses informal or what might loosely be termed social communication between organizational members. Looking at the diagram I made, it reinforces that organizational communication is a complex and continuous process through which organizational members create, maintain, and change their organization. I want you to think about this. How do symbols, language, words, images, and nonverbal communication create, maintain, and change your organization? I want you to think and note as many ways that you can. You might not think of many yet. I'm going to address this very specifically as we move through the material. Hopefully, your list will get longer as we delve into this. Included in this view of organizational communication is that all organizational members take part in the process. Also that it's transactional. Both sender and receiver take part in the process of creating shared meanings, and both influence each other. Organizations emerge from communication and are developed, changed, and even contested through it. Two things my diagram doesn't represent is that organizational members have varying degrees of power and that shared meanings aren't always achieved. I couldn't think quite how to do this in the picture without making it too busy. Okay, changing gears again. Let's turn our focus to looking at organizational culture. Keaton says organizational culture is the set of artifacts, values, and assumptions that emerges from the interaction of organizational members. Often culture is graphically represented as an iceberg. Members of every organization share assumptions that serve as the foundation for organizational cultures. These are unseen. Assumptions and values are implicit. They're not seen, but they underpin the manifest symbols or artifacts such as languages, stories, rituals, dress codes, and all the things that you can hear and touch. This could be diagrammed a different way. Maybe you could diagram your organization and fill in the different boxes. Let's diagram the UI. As with your ethnography, we'll begin by looking at the symbols and artifacts. Symbols and artifacts include anything you can see, hear and touch. It could be buildings, walkways, anything with a name on. Look at a campus map. Do you know who all these people are? Phillips, Van Allen, Becker, Spence, Papa John, Tippy, Gilmore, Danforth, Dorm, Stanley. I could go on and on. At the time of making this presentation, my daughter had a friend over, a junior in the College of Business. I asked her why the Tippy College of Business was called Tippy, and she didn't know. I don't mean to sound blaming or anything, but I want to ask you a personal question. You signed up for this class and are a member of the UI and have spent thousands on your education. So my question is, do you think you have been a bit of a couch potato about the organizational culture of the UI? Have you ever wondered why these particular people are celebrated and commemorated and others are not? Is it because they bear some special relationship to the values and assumptions that underpin these manifest items of organizational culture? My bet it is. One of the elements of culture is it's not random. There's usually a reason for everything. And when you're exploring any type of culture, you have to be a detective by starting out with what you can see. Then we use a process of inductive reasoning to tie what we see to theory. This is what you'll do with your ethnography paper, and what many researchers do who fall under the interpretivist research paradigm. We'll talk more about this a bit later. But in this case of looking at organizational culture of the UI, we would start to look at the symbols and artifacts and see if there are patterns between them. Symbols are words, images, names, verbal behaviours, non-verbal behaviours, written materials, publicity materials, materials on website, physical layout. The textbook lists many of these. Generally, we don't look at just one artifact, but patterns between them. So let's just look at a few of the named buildings or spaces on campus. Hubbard Park, Tian Cleary Walkway, Jones Cyber Commons in the College of Education, and Peterson Residence Hall. The On Iowa website lists many of the firsts the UI is famous for. I won't read these off. Why don't you take a few seconds and read them yourself? The UI has a number of places named after African American and women administrators and teachers, and it highlights a lot of firsts by people from diverse backgrounds. So I think this goes to show that maybe the UI thinks that diversity is important. So because of this, I might choose to focus on the diversity element of the UI's organisational culture and design my research questions and subsequent research into the UI's organisational culture to explore this. So then I try and determine more about the UI's values. Values are a broad tendency to prefer certain states of affairs over others, and they determine our view of reality. Values are strategies, principles, or qualities that are considered ideal, worthwhile, or desirable, and as a result create guidelines for organisational behaviour. So let's look at the UI's values. I'll give you a few seconds to read examples from the mission statement of the university's strategic plan and also the core values at the bottom of the picture. So the UI and other organisations have espoused values. These are the openly stated values that the UI claims to adhere to and advocate. But we have to ask the question, does the organisational behaviour and symbols and artefacts reflect this? If we focused on diversity, we might look at symbols and artefacts such as racial, ethnic, religious composition of faculty and staff, retention rates, compensation rates of paid staff members, and make up a questionnaire to administer to see if a wide range of people, including majority students, feel respected on campus. Essentially, the question would be, does the UI or your organisation walk the walk as well as talk the talk? Now let's look at assumptions. Assumptions are beliefs that are so deeply entrenched that organisational members no longer discuss them. They are tacit, subtle, abstract, and implicit. Perhaps one of the assumptions we never discuss at the UI is that all people are created equal. And yet if you look around, maybe we've got manifestations that really support this assumption. An Iowa lawmaker just made aware some of our basic assumptions about tenure. An Iowa lawmaker has proposed ending tenure at public universities. If you look at the picture, you'll see part of a letter from Tom Vaughan, the head of the UI Faculty Senate, that was sent out to all faculty. This outlines some of the basic assumptions that we have about teaching. So again, I'm going to ask you to think about your organisation. How would you fill in the blanks? Okay, it's our final change of gears now. This week, I've asked you to complete an organisational identification self-inventory. This seeks to measure how strongly you identify with your organisation. I hope you find it interesting and meaningful. I hope you've enjoyed the materials I've presented this week and that you've taken note of some of the questions I've asked you to think about. Hopefully, they'll help you to begin to put together some of the different pieces of your organisational culture. Hope you have a good week.